Third session here is kind of a second cousin of the one we just had, but this session is about quality of life, impacts, and benefits. How does having passenger, essentially this is about what are the myriad ways in which having passenger rail service positively impacts the quality of life of a community? We've already had some discussion about this, but we're going to continue this in a deeper vein here in this panel. We're talking about how it improves the lives of community members, especially in our smaller rural communities like mine in Glendive, tribal communities especially, getting that access, that critical access to health care, to sending kids to college, to connecting families, all those various ways that it benefits communities economically, socially. There's a wide variety of ways that it does this. So that's what this panel is about. For this panel, we've got joining us remotely, we've got Nate Cavanaugh, who is the president of president of the Cut Bank Montana Chamber of Commerce. Also joining remotely is Phil Rico, the mayor of Trinidad, Colorado, who's going to talk about how it benefits his community. Both Nate and Phil are in communities that are served by existing long-distance trains, Nate with the Empire Builder and Phil with the Southwest Chief. Also joining us are Hal Gard with Jacobs Engineering, Breck LeBeg also joining remote with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. So you can imagine that Breck is probably going to talk a lot about how it impacts quality of life in terms of access to health care. And finally, Tyler Amundsen with Big Sky Senior Services. And our moderator for this panel is Mr. Gary Wirt. Gary is a retired from the U.S. Department of Transportation, and at present serves as the Vice President of All Aboard Washington, the Washington State Rail Advocacy Organization. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Gary.
Thank you, Jason. So I'm hoping our remote panelists are here. So we have 5 panelists, so we're going to be watching our time here so we don't go overboard. But quality of life benefits. The term quality of life here, as it relates to passenger rail, really is derived from improved standard of health, improved comfort, and improved happiness. As others have mentioned, it means improved access to medical services, hospitals, higher educational facilities. Just in Washington State, the North Coast Hiawatha route, there are at least 6 higher education universities along that route, and probably a myriad of students that would like to use that service. Quality of life also means improved mobility for travelers, particularly those with physical disabilities, those who cannot drive for various reasons, as Anna Zavarts has already told us, and some of them who cannot afford a vehicle or cannot afford to fly. Some people have a fear of flying. And so in a lot of these cities, there are just very few public transportation options available. Many of them do not have airlines. They might be lucky if they have one Greyhound bus, which could be gone by the next few months, you don't know. So passenger rail has a degree of reliability and dependability that's important. Also, the quality of life is improved by the quality of the journey itself. It's improved by increased comfort. Riding in the train is more relaxing than driving. You can be productive while you're on the train. You get up and get something to eat. You can walk around. You can take your bicycle. And with Wi-Fi, you can be productive. So with that, I'm going to lead into our first panelist, who is Phil Rico. Phil is the mayor of the city of Trinidad, Colorado, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how passenger rail can improve the quality of life along I-95, on I-25. I'm back in Washington, D.C. Phil, are you on?
We're working on getting Phil.
Okay. Okay, Phil's got to leave, I know it. So let's go on to Hal Gard. Go ahead, Hal. Hal is recently completed a 30-year career with the Oregon Department of Transportation as the Rail and Public Transit Division Administrator, and he's now with Jacobs Engineering, leading their transportation design group. Hal.
Does this work? Yep. So good afternoon, everybody. I think the previous panel made a really good point of just the importance of connectivity, public transportation, particularly with rural communities. And we are looking for my slides. There we go. So let's just jump to the next slide. And what I really wanted to do was just share an example that we did in Oregon to provide connectivity to the main passenger rail networks and link rural communities. Do I need to put that in my pocket? I would do it for you if you want. No, that's fine. Just remind me to take it out. And just, just to double emphasize, public transportation, it allows folks in rural communities, allows elders to age in place because they're allowed access to, critical daily services. It allows the small communities to keep their youth, gives them access to education, to jobs, to other opportunities. But you have limited distribution of rail lines. In Oregon, we made a very deliberate effort to provide connectivity across the state to the main passenger rail lines. A little quick, you got ahead of me, go back one. So, there we go. So this was the original Amtrak Thruway map, and Amtrak did a pretty good job of connecting most of the state to the main north-south line, which is the Coast Starlight, and then that is augmented by the Amtrak Cascades. It's co-operated by the state of Washington and Oregon. And then bus feeder services would feed into the major stations so that folks could go to California, go up to Washington. Next slide. That thruway service, I'm changing the slides. I thought it was a microphone. Holy cow, got it now. All right. See, I'm not technologically, Washington DOT took over that thruway component and added what's called the point service. And we came up with a mixed funding buckets to pay for that. A lot of it is done with FTA, elderly, and disabled funding along with rural services funding, provide that connectivity. Next piece we did was work with small service providers. So this is what we like to call NORWATA. It's the Northwest Transit Association conglomerate. It's 3 small transit districts that aligned services, schedules, and stops. And then they're tied in, you'll see where the point network, those transit services tie those in across the state. Another example I'm really proud of is this is the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. They are the largest public transportation provider in northeastern Oregon, which is particularly remote. And they are actually the one group that ties up through Pasco, Washington. They tie into the East-West Empire Builder, going back and forth. So really, it's the network build out. It pulls in those small rural communities, ties them into the longer long-distance network. It's done really inexpensively. It's really conversations between service providers to align stops and schedules. It also provides increased frequency. So particularly in the, I'm gonna go back. Okay. When we go to the main passenger rail service between Eugene and Portland, we actually augment our daily round trips through bus service, just so that folks can, have a broader range of opportunities in terms of their round trips. But, Montana and Oregon are not that dissimilar. They're large states. There's a huge amount of public land. In Oregon, it's 56% public land. Very large, empty rural parts of the state, small rural communities. And then it's got a whole series of distributed population centers. And connection there is critical, particularly somebody mentioned earlier about access to hospital and certain care facilities and education. So that's the way it's done. I'll wait for questions. That's it.
Thank you, Hal. Is Phil Rico on yet? Okay, good, great. So Phil, welcome. As I said, Phil's the mayor of Trinidad, Colorado. So Phil, it's all yours.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to speak today on the potential Fun Rail passenger rail. In 2017, the Colorado Southwest Chief Commission was legislatively repurposed to become the Southwest Chief and Front Rail Passenger Rail Commission. We were tasked to facilitate implementation and operation of future passenger rail along the I-25 corridor, including assessing possible direct service from Pueblo to Trinidad. The commission was comprised of 11 voting members and 3 non-voting members, including members from CDOT, Amtrak, and BNSF. Work began by submitting grants for upgrades to the current rail system, including welded rail, tire replacement, and PTC. The upgrades are for the rail systems from Kansas into Colorado and on to Lamy, New Mexico. From 2017 to 2021, we received Tiger, Chrissy, and the current raise grant is in place to complete the last 34 miles of upgrades. HDR was hired to conduct an analysis on a through-car study from Lahaina, Colorado to Pueblo, Colorado, continuing on to Colorado Springs, Denver, and Fort Collins. Also included in their charge was to conduct a survey to see if the populace would support rail service along the I-25 corridor and also public engagements. A study was also done for suggested rail alignments through the Denver area to Fort Collins. Going on to 2021 and Senate Bill 21-238, which was passed by the legislature establishing the new Front Range Passenger Rail District and signed by Governor Polis. In early 2022, the previous commission completed a commission closeout and transition report to pass off to the new rail district. In May of 2022, the new Front Rail District held its first meeting. The new board consists of 17 voting members and non-voting members from BNSF, UP, RTD, I-70 Mountain Corridor Coalition, Wyoming, and New Mexico. Of course, first order of business was to begin drafting governance policies, including bylaws and communication protocols. Senate Bill 238 Front Range Passenger Rail District purpose is planning, designing, developing, financing, constructing, operating, and maintaining an interconnected passenger rail system along the Front Range from Fort Collins to Pueblo, and a possible direct connection from Pueblo to Walsenburg and on to Trinidad, continuing on to New Mexico. Financing via a ballot measure will be the biggest item to tackle. The bill states that a sales tax of 0.08 cents can be asked of the citizens along the I-25 corridor. The potential recommended rail alignments from Colorado Springs through Denver and further north will have obstacles that need to be addressed. All this will need to be done by conducting an alternative analysis, the service development plan, and pre-NEPA activities. Stakeholder, political, and public engagement will be vital components during the process, along with station area plans, operations, and a phasing plan. This initial work is designated to be done between 2022 and 2024. Adding passenger rail to the I-25 corridor will be essential in the coming years. The Front Range population from Pueblo to Fort Collins is expected to grow substantially by 2030 and more so by 2050. Paving roads is not the answer. Passenger rail is the best answer because it will take a lot of traffic off the roads, decrease pollution, allow for safer travel, especially in winter, and will allow working class commuters to work while riding. Long-term projection is to add the direct line to Trinidad because riders traveling from the northern Front Range to New Mexico and west will not want to divert at Pueblo to Lahaina and back to Trinidad. Travel to Chicago via through-car service from Pueblo to Lahaina is ideal. Travel to the northern Front Range from Chicago will be accomplished via through-car service to Pueblo, and travel to the west will be accomplished by riding from Lahaina to Trinidad and on to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and west. Amtrak currently services El Paso east to west, and linking Albuquerque to those routes may not be appealing. Linking Amtrak north of Cheyenne to Montana and beyond is a tall order because we are not aware of prior service that would have statutory standing in Amtrak's formation. Any formation of this would require legislation and federal responsibility and would probably be required in order to use a freight right-of-way, and it would probably exceed the 750-mile length and would become a federal responsibility for funding. All said, the I-25 corridor is high on Amtrak's list. Thank you for listening, and any questions I'd like to answer at this point in time.
Yeah, Phil has to jump off, so if there's any questions for Phil, this would be a better time to do it than at the end when he's not here. Thank you, Phil. That sounds like a big deal. I mean, good luck. You're in charge.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Our next panelist is Nate Kavanaugh. Nate is the CEO of Cut Bank, Montana Chamber of Commerce, and he's going to talk to us about the benefits of passenger rail's quality of life on small communities. Cut Bank is about 3,000 people. Nate?
Hey, yeah, thanks. I am very thankful to be able to be a rural voice and provide some examples of how important rail service is to communities like mine. And it's the two reasons that pop out most to me are to connect families that live here with their families that live elsewhere. I'm just thinking of my neighbor. She lives 2 doors down, and she makes probably about monthly trips to Portland using the train to visit her granddaughters and her daughter that live there. I'm thinking of my grandpa who took the train to Chicago to stay with my aunt. I took the train myself to go across the mountains and get off in Whitefish to meet my family there. And when I got on the train in Cut Bank, I jumped on with another Cut Bank family, and they were going to see their relatives in Seattle. And so I know there's just a lot of people that rely on the train to see their relatives, and it allows, like you said, people to age in place. And so I think it's really important for the kind of older population who are really invested in their community and don't want to leave. It allows them to stay here and then still connect with their loved ones that live all over the place. I'm also thinking about the people that might use it for access to healthcare. I know people in Cut Bank in our surrounding area might hop on the train to get to Kalispell to use the services there, Spokane, Seattle. I actually I coached tennis too. I had a player who had an injury, and I know he and his family hopped on the train again to get to a provider in Spokane. And so there's a lot of reasons that people use it here, and we're so thankful and appreciative that we do have rail service because we're in a pretty remote part of the state. We're way up north on the High Line of Montana. We're 30 miles south of the Canadian border and 45 minutes east of Glacier Park. And so it really it improves our quality of life because it gives us access to a lot of things that we might not otherwise have, or it also saves us an 1.5 hour or 2 hour drive to airports. And then just for my own examples, I really like the train because I am not a fan of Marias Pass in the winter. And so just having the option of the train really gives me peace of mind that if the weather is bad and I need to get across the mountains, it's just nice to know that I have that option. Another thing that came to mind was tourism. So Cut Bank, like I said, is close to Glacier National Park. And I know there was an example. I was talking to our museum director. It was not great weather in Glacier, and there was a couple that rode the train from East Glacier to Cut Bank just as a day trip, something to do. And so as important it is for the residents of Cut Bank to have access to other places, the rail is really important because it gives people access to our community when they need something to do or just as a stop on their way across the country. So those are kind of the highlights that I had for being a rural community served by the train, and it's something that we definitely appreciate and try to take advantage. It's just sometimes our numbers probably seem low because there just aren't many people up here. But again, I'm happy to answer any questions or speak more about how the train serves my rural community at the end of the panel.
Thank you, Nate. That's very good remarks from small communities, and I'm sure there's other small communities that would have similar comments if they were present today. Mm-hmm. Our next panelist is Dr. Breck Lebeg. He's a member of the Washington State Physicians for Social Responsibility, and he's going to give us a presentation about some benefits he perceives from passenger rail. Dr. Lebeg.
All right, Gary, thanks. Let's do a quick sound check first. 1, 2, 3. How me?
Loud and clear.
We got a echo here, but I think we'll deal with that. Good. And for those showing the slides, put my slides up, if you would, as a preference to my picture, because now you've seen me, you don't need any more. We'll get to the slides here in a moment. Seems like everybody's got to have a train story to get in the door. So here's mine. 40 years ago, when I was working my way through college, I was the last guy hired in the Hammond yard as a switchman by the Erie Lackawanna just before they went broke. Not my fault. But it did give me the good fortune to get introduced to occupational medicine and to learn how to take good care of workers. So I can barely see through the camera. Are my slides up or not?
We wanted to
Tell
look
me
at you
if the
again.
slides are my slides up?
Yes.
Wonderful. I've only got a corner view of the room here. And so we're going to start with my topic is electric regional rail. I'm a doc. You might wonder why a doc is talking about trains. And that was my first introduction, as I said. But more importantly, it has to do with the health of the climate and the health of the people that work on trains, as well as all the rest of us. Slide, please. Let's do this. Where am I?
Which train?
Shout it out. Which train?
We're going to Paris.
That is the Eurostar from St. Pancras to Gare du Nord in Paris. And I had the very good fortune, my wife and I, to be able to go across through the channel just a couple of weeks ago between the two. It happened to be during the heat wave there. It was pretty comfortable there in the train. It's been open for 20 years, if you may know, and some of you may have had the opportunity to ride that. It's an electric train, goes under the channel. I want to talk a little bit, slide please, to talk about transport, 45% of greenhouse gas. So again, if we could pull that slide up, thanks. It breaks down into gasoline on the road, 22%, diesel about 9%, aviation 9%, marine 3%. The figures I looked at said rail only contributes less than 1%. I put question marks after that because depending on whose study you look at, that's going to vary. The Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, one of our main reasons to exist is to take good care of not only our patients, but good care of the environment as well. And we have shifted dramatically to talk about what's good for the environment as well as what's good for the people. The health effects of PM 2.5, PM 2.5, tiny, tiny little particles in fossil fuel smoke, lodge in the lung. And when they get in there, they're permanently in there. You may have heard of black lung disease, of course. That's the big stuff that you can cough out from mining coal, for example. But the tiny stuff gets in there, it leads to heart disease, it leads to lung disease. It's particularly those at risk are the yard workers and the road and trackside dwellers that are along the highways as well as along the rail, the highest concentration risk. There's also mental effects. If you've been noticing the popular press lately, people are afraid. They're afraid of what's happening, and it affects their sleep, their anxiety, their depression. If there are climate disasters, such as fires, floods, hurricanes, we've heard all about those in the news lately. People have genuine PTSD as a result of barely escaping with their lives. And finally, there's heat injuries and deaths. Even here in the Pacific Northwest, you may have kept track that the medical examiner believes, and so found, that hundreds of people died as a result of heat injury from the heat last June. Next slide that says 621 heat record. Anybody read what that says? It's over 110 degrees. That was on my back porch, right near Puget Sound. So even being near the water didn't protect us from the heat in the record heat last year. By the way, Gary, I forgot to ask you, give me a 2-minute warning, if you would, and a 1-minute warning when my time is up, so I've got plenty of time for the other panelists and the questions.
Sure, we're doing okay.
Good. Next slide. I want to introduce you to Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility's Climate and Health Report. If you want to just Google it, just Google WPSR.org. We recently released a climate and health report. It's 50 pages long. There's no test at the end, but it really talks about some of the risks. And I'm just going to go through some of the high points of that report. Those at highest risk of climate change. By the way, I'm setting aside the cause issue. I'm not going to take political sides. whether it's human caused or a natural cycle, the fact is it's hotter than it's ever been. And the fact is that we're burning and we're flooding. Those are the weather facts. Those at highest risk, as you might know or think or guess, are kids, pregnant women, elderly people who can't move from here to there or some other this other place, chronically ill, communities of color, those with low income. Poor people can't just pick it up and move it out and buy the hotel that it takes to move out of the climate risk areas. Key strategies that WPSR has proposed to protect health from climate change are a transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. I'll come back to that in a moment. Things I think we can all agree on: maximize energy efficiency and minimize waste. No reason to keep the engine running if you're not going anywhere. They're good business strategies and practices as well as being good for health. You save money. We support, and here's a point I want to emphasize, a rapid mode shift from roads to rails for both freight and passengers as a health imperative. And by the way, we endorsed the policy statement of 3 important rail organizations in Washington state as a medical organization. And I think we were the first in the state to do so, and perhaps the first in the country to endorse this idea of, yes, rail transport is much more efficient. You all know that much better than I. Much more efficient because you've got steel on steel. You don't have the rolling friction that you have with rubber tires on asphalt. So the mode shift from road to rail is more efficient and more healthier, even if without electrifying trains, which I'll get back to in a moment. Next slide. The one that says, my other trike is a Harley. That's an adult trike. I want to call your attention to the front tire. What's different about that is it's got an electric motor in the hub. Tiny little electric motor in the hub. You push the button and it goes right up the hill. It's got a battery that sits under the seat about the size of a brick. Plug it in and recharge it. It's a great way to get around, a great way to go to the grocery store. Not as cool as a Harley trike, but it gets around. Next slide, climate and health report. We have some suggestions for immediate solutions. I showed that trike slide, that bicycle slide, because we heartily endorse low carbon public and active transport. Walking and cycling, first of all, you know, that last mile problem. How do I get from my house to the public transportation and back again? As walkable communities, as cycling, including electric cycles, if that's available, to mitigate climate change by reducing pollution. And there, oh, by the way, there's that benefit of getting some physical exercise too. If you ever gone to physical rehab, they say motion is lotion. That's true for the joints and muscles of the body. Great way to stay healthy. We also support immediate solution of building electrification. Very strong advocacy in the state of Washington of shifting away from gas-fired furnaces and stoves and ovens to electrical. And oh, by the way, that electricity can be low carbon either by wind, by solar, and of course in Washington state by hydro. Next steps, among many others, rapidly transitioning that public rail and bus system to 100% electric. That's beginning to happen in the state of Washington. We're also going, by the way, bought a couple of electric ferries. I'll show you a picture one here in a moment. Prioritizing electric trains on existing rail over new high-speed rail. That may be controversial, but we believe we should build out our current infrastructure and improve the current infrastructure and electrify at immediate and very early steps for our climate response. Next slide. Here's one that may be controversial. It's our stated policy, the organization, it goes all the way back to 2015, is that there be no oil transport by rail because of the risks. You can read the slide there yourself. You may react to some of those, may react to that policy. It fits our general policy of decarbonization as a way of decreasing inhaled particles and as a way of decreasing climate change as well. Next slide, please. What about ships? This is a picture from Ålesund, Norway. There are 2 ships, cruise ships there, if you can see. I don't know how well it shows up on that slide. The one to the left with the top white superstructure, you may see bunker fuel fume coming out of the stacks. The one ahead, I won't mention which lines they are or which ships' names they are, but the one ahead, it's there at the dock all right. And I don't know whether it's on shore power or whether simply they're using a cleaner fuel. But that ship in the back is clearly contributing to particles, to dock workers, to the rail workers if they're loading, the longshoremen and the drayage and the others. So that's why we're talking about, and we strongly advocate, move to electrification. Here's an example of an electric Fjord ferry in Norway. I'm sorry I don't have the pointer to point it out. You can see the tall rectangular structure on the left. You can see the superstructure of the ferry on the right. Connecting the two is a very thin sort of parallel, almost like tracks going across. That's a charging shoe that comes out as the ferry comes into dock. It comes out, clips into the charging port of the ferry, and charges during that roughly 20 minutes of offloading and onloading in that process. Norway produces most of their electricity by hydropower. They've got the mountainous areas and all of these rivers and falling water, of course, and so very clean production of electrical power, in addition to the fact that, of course, they've got the North Sea oil, but they're not using that for electricity production. Well, where does it come from? If we say electrify, we believe that we have the responsibility to say, where is it coming from? Right now, Washington Power is about 50-odd% hydro, 22% gas and coal, 5% wind and nuclear, less than 0.5% solar. About 14% is unspecified. What that means is the grid source did not have to be disclosed as to the source. We have about 300 megawatts of solar, about 3,000 megawatts of wind. A lot of big wind towers up on the ridges between here and Spokane, for example. Washington legislature just passed an act, CETA, Clean Energy Transformation Act. Mandates, requires 80% carbon-free electricity by 2030 to try to meet those clean goals, and 100% carbon-free by 2045. We got a lot of work to do.
2 minutes, Brett.
Thank you. Say again?
2 minutes.
Right, I'll talk fast and we'll wrap up here in just a moment. So we're saying decarbonize electricity supply, all the above, solar, wind, hydro, tidal, hydrogen, wherever it comes from. I'm going to say nuclear there because it's 20% of U.S. low carbon power. Washington has one plant. You can see the other data there. And what we don't have time to get into is what the health risks are. We, as responsible physicians, believe that the total health risks of any energy source should be calculated and known and disseminated to the public to make wise decisions. Here's a station. Anybody know where that is? Musée d'Orsay in Paris. What do you do with an old station? Gorgeous, absolutely beautiful, gorgeous old station with an art museum, and great place to see if you got time. So to summarize, we believe health has environmental and social determinants of health. It's not just whether you get an infectious disease or fall down and break an arm. Healthy humans require a healthy environment. Fossil fuel transport clearly makes people unwell. The research is clear. We must stop making people sick. Electric rail, we believe, is a healthier transport than gasoline or diesel cars on roads. So we strongly support rapidly mode shifting to rail and then electrifying rail as that is technically feasible, politically feasible, economically feasible as well. We can be your allies in this. We want to keep you healthy. Stick with us. Here's a slide from my back deck. This is it's not a moon. It says goodnight moon. This is the sun set through the smoke a couple of years ago during the fires in the area. Last slide is how you get a hold of us through those areas. I thank you for listening. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Brett. Our last panelist is Tyler Edmondson. Tyler's Executive Director of Big Sky Senior Services. Tyler.
I have to obligatory start with a train story as well, and it's that I grew up in Montana hearing about the Southern Rail and how people got to travel on it and never got to do it. So my family has actually become fans of traveling by rail for vacation and using it as a way to enjoy our time. And so Hal, some of the networks you talked about are some of the networks that we've used to appreciate this beautiful Northwest region that we're from. I served for 10 years as a Methodist pastor, just stepped in as an executive director of Big Sky Senior Services. We're a nonprofit here in Billings, and we serve over 400 seniors a year, mostly low income, to stay in their homes and stay independent. Along with that, we look at how to help make our communities more dementia friendly. And so the things I want to raise with you about rail travel really relate to low income and the reality that we have a lot of folks in our community and an increasing number of folks who have dementia or some form of memory loss. And the reality is, for many of the folks that we work with, especially low-income seniors, they can't drive. And there is not safe modes of transportation for them to travel, even between the larger cities in Montana. And so we've heard folks talk about medical needs. That's one big reason people travel to Billings, especially from the surrounding area, is that. But there's not safe ways if you don't drive. And so you're constantly working. You're lucky if you've got a family member. You're lucky if you've got a good friend. And if you can't, you might be jumping on a bus, and our bus networks, unfortunately, are also not safe for seniors currently, especially when it comes to mobility. So rail becomes a real helpful thing for us to think about when we talk about creating mobility-friendly ways for people to travel to get to different places. I also work with two great colleagues who are seniors themselves. I am not a senior, so I always get in trouble about talking about seniors. I apologize. But they both have family in Bozeman, and both of them have shared with me over and over again, they don't feel comfortable traveling in the winter from Billings to Bozeman just to visit family. One of them has a spouse with memory loss, and so it is getting harder and harder for her to drive with her spouse who has memory loss just because she needs to be constantly talking and working with him, and it can be very distracting when he has a moment when he doesn't realize where he is. So passenger rail would create an opportunity for them to start traveling between communities and having access to the things they need. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to talk about this, because I think we have populations of folks throughout our region in Montana, but as well as the whole area we've been talking about, that need access to these different forms of transportation for medical needs, but not only that, because the quality of life is increased when they can go see their loved ones and take care of their health.
Thank you. I just have a quick comment before we start our Q&A session, but one of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet is that is a quality of life matter is how COVID has changed the demographics of where we live versus where we're employed. And I'd like to give you one example how trains can fit into this. My older son is a executive for Starbucks in the south end of Seattle. He actually lives in West Seattle. And over the past, since 2020, he tells me, when the COVID started, he's actually only gone in to work at Starbucks headquarters twice in that period of time. So he and his wife, who live in West Seattle, they would like to move east of the Cascades where the weather is a little drier. And he tells me if there was a reasonable train service, they could live over in Yakima or somewhere in that area, considerably less cost. As an example, the median home sales price in King County, that's Seattle, in June was $850,000. That same size price in Yakima County, east of the Cascades, was $375,000. So you can live in Yakima County, you could ride a train and live there at considerably less cost. So thank all of our distinguished panelists for their contribution, and now we're open to questions. If you can remember what all these people said, we'll have to recite it from memory. Here's one over here.
I don't know. Is it on? Sure is. Thanks, Gary. Is our man from Cutbank still on? If not, I think he mentioned the population of Cutbank is 3,000 approximately. Does that sound right? Oh, there he is.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, great. And 3,000 people about in Cutbank?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Well, I just wanted to ask that question, make a comment that if you look over the last 10 years of recent available Amtrak ridership statistics, ridership from Cutbank starts at 2,000 and in some years peaks at about 2,900. So that means that you're looking at 60 to almost 100% of the population equivalent that's using the train. And so even though 3,000 passengers for a year doesn't sound like a lot, just to reinforce his point, I mean, it's just massive for the community to have that. I think it's fabulous.
Right. And I would kind of add that I feel like our station probably serves even, towns like Valier that are kind of 300 people that it's about 30 miles south, and Sunburst north of us. So yeah, it's definitely helps a lot of people out in our area.
I have a question, Nathan. My name's Paul Pacini. I'm from Helena, Montana. And I'm just wondering, in a small community like Cutbank with Amtrak running through it or near it, do you have any employees, any railroad employees who have turned Cutbank into their home?
Yeah, so we have, I mean, I guess I apologize, but like conductors or engineers who, I can think of 2 that live in Cutbank and a few in the region. I think Shelby is actually where they get on and I guess exchange staff there. But I can think of a few for sure.
Anybody else? Here's one back here. We've got about 5 minutes yet.
Hi, folks. I'm Karen Criswell. I am the Oregon Department of Transportation Public Transportation Division Administrator. So I followed HAL, and then we reorged. So I have both passenger rail and public transportation bike ped programs in my division's portfolio. And as I was listening to this panel as well as the previous panel on equity and transportation, my brain just kept going to the importance of passenger rail as part of statewide, regional, national, interconnected multimodal transportation systems. And I was talking with a seatmate from North Dakota, and she was sharing with me how there isn't very good public transportation funding in North Dakota, that really the only way to get between cities is potentially passenger rail. And so I guess I just wanted to make that comment to say that I think we need both. I think they're complementary, and I think we should be looking to apply the right public transportation solution to the situation at hand. So for whatever it's worth, let's do more of everything.
And I'd just like to speak, the reality like here in Billings for us as a nonprofit is we are the hub for the region, and we have people coming in for services from all over. To your point, there are no methods of transportation besides catching a ride with somebody. And so it is a big issue when we're talking about services for these communities.
Oh, thank you. I have a question for Breck, back in Seattle. Are you there?
I'm here. Go ahead.
Oh, terrific. Since you're a physician, you probably get to see a lot of health data. And if you, has anyone put together data that could quantify if the intermodal or multimodal transportation was more widely used, say people bringing their bicycle, riding it to the bus stop, bringing their bike on the train, riding to wherever they're going, walking more, would that be a statistically significant increase in health?
I'll say yes. I don't have the data in my head to back it up.
Well,
Other countries do that. For example, in France, they ride their bikes all up and down in protected bike lanes so they don't get hit by the cars, and they'll put it on the train when they're ready to go longer distance.
I want to put a couple of factual pieces of information on the record of the summit that relates to this panel, and I invite the panel to comment on it. Dave Strohmeyer, our chair of the Big Sky Rail Authority, took the leadership in arranging for a meeting with our operations director for the Veterans Administration in Helena. And we asked the question as to how would passenger rail affect the VA operations? And we were somewhat surprised at first at the answer, but we really found it insightful. And I particularly want the FRA to listen to how this would affect the VA in Montana. They run clinics in Billings, Miles City, and I believe Glendive. Is that correct, Jason? Yeah. Anyway, they send professionals, doctors, technicians, nurses, in vehicles, cars driving a day out to a clinic in Miles City. They drive out there a whole day. It's a tough drive sometime, especially in winter. Then they give clinical service for one day, and then they drive back the third day. 2 days of driving for 1 day of service. You get on a passenger train, and first of all, the medical personnel isn't beaten up by driving. They can relax on the train. They can do work. They can do their notes for their cases. They can get up to speed on administrative activities, etc. And if we had good connections, they can even do email. And likewise, on the way back, they gain 2 days of professional work, or at least better working conditions for their staff for 1 day of travel. And I just want to, I've got a second situation, maybe I'll find another time to insert it into the record of this summit, but I wanted to put that on the record in the Quality of Life Benefits panel. And if there's any comments by anyone on it, I would appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. I think we're about out of time, right, Jason? Okay, we'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you, Gary, and thanks to all our panelists. Appreciate your time. All right, and with that, we actually have a full 10-minute break, guys. Yay. So.